Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. They took the wrong monster. The thought didn't scream through Julian's mind. It whispered, cold and serpentine, as he stared at the shattered remains of his penthouse living room. A single drop of blood, bright crimson against the pristine white marble, marked the spot where his husband had been dragged away. Most Omegas would be weeping, calling the police, or crumbling under the weight of the pheromones of distress that still lingered in the air like burnt sugar. But Julian stood perfectly still, his pulse resting at a calm, predatory 45 beats per minute. He reached into his pocket, bypassing his phone, and pulled out a silver hairpin. With a flick of his wrist, he pinned his chaotic, honey-blonde locks back, exposing the sharp, icy gaze that the underworld had long forgotten. He stepped over the broken glass, his soft house slippers making no sound, and walked toward the hidden safe behind the grand piano. Tonight, the city of obsession would learn why the devil married him. The rain in the city of Oakhaven didn't wash away sins. It merely made them glisten under the neon lights. The underworld knew Vittorio Vito Moretti as the capo of capos, an alpha of such terrifying potency that rival gangs wouldn't dare breathe in his direction without permission. He was obsidian and steel, a man who ruled with a velvet-gloved iron fist. And by his side, always, was Julian. Julian, the delicate, piano-playing Omega. Julian, who wore cashmere sweaters and smiled with the innocence of a saint. Julian, who fainted at the sight of blood during that one dinner party in 22. The underworld whispered that Vito had grown soft, domesticating himself with a trophy wife who offered nothing but beauty and warmth. They were fools. 3 hours ago, a tactical team had breached the Moretti penthouse. They had used high-grade alpha suppressors, a chemical weapon illegal in 3 quadrants, to bring Vito to his knees. They had dragged him out while Julian was in the bath. When Julian had emerged, wrapped in a towel, he found the chaos. Now, Julian sat in the back of a blacked-out sedan, not the one Vito owned, but an old, nondescript vehicle he kept in a storage unit under a fake name. He wore a tailored white suit, an intentional choice. He wanted every drop of blood he spilled tonight to show. He checked the magazine of his custom-modified Sig Sauer. He didn't need a frantic search for clues. He knew exactly who had the audacity. Only one faction had access to military-grade suppressors, the Iron Syndicate, led by Cassius Draven. Cassius, a man who had once been Vito's lieutenant, a man consumed by jealousy and the deluded belief that Vito's marriage to a weakling like Julian had made the family vulnerable. Julian's phone buzzed on the dashboard. A restricted number. He answered, putting it on speaker. "We have him." Cassius's voice rasped, dripping with arrogant triumph. "Listen to me closely, little bird. You are going to sign over the deed to the western docks and the shipping routes. If you call the police, or if you tell Vito's men, I will send him back to you in pieces. Do you understand, sweet thing? Don't try to be brave." Julian stared at the windshield, watching the wipers slice through the rain. His voice, when he spoke, was an octave lower than the gentle tenor Cassius was used to. It was devoid of inflection, flat and terrifyingly hollow. "Cassius," there was a pause on the other end. The tone wasn't right. It wasn't fearful. "Do you remember the White Lily incident in Shanghai 7 years ago?" Julian asked softly. What are you babbling about? I don't have time for history lessons, whore. The assassin who dismantled the Triad leadership in a single night. They never caught him. They only found white lilies on the bodies." Julian racked the slide of his gun, the metallic clack-clack echoing clearly through the phone line. "Vito didn't marry me because I needed protection, Cassius. He married me because he was the only one who could ask me to stop." Julian hung up. He floored the accelerator. The Iron Syndicate operated out of a repurposed slaughterhouse in the industrial district. It was a fortress of concrete and rusted metal, guarded by 20 heavily armed alphas. To a civilian, it was impenetrable. To a tactician, it was a challenge. To Julian, it was a playground. He didn't sneak in. That would take too long. He drove the sedan through the front gate at 80 miles per hour, the collision tearing the metal hinges from the stone pillars. The car spun out in the courtyard, mud and gravel spraying into the air. Before the guards could even raise their rifles, Julian was moving. He exited the vehicle with a fluidity that defied physics. The first shot took the guard in the watchtower through the left eye. The second and third shots dropped the two alphas rushing the car, hitting the small gaps between their tactical vest plates. Julian moved like smoke. He was a dancer amidst the violence, his white suit glowing eerily under the floodlights. He didn't run. He glided, pivoting on his heel to dodge a burst of gunfire, returning fire with supernatural precision. An alpha twice his size charged him with a machete, roaring a challenge meant to paralyze an omega with fear. Julian didn't flinch. He stepped inside the alpha's guard, dropping his center of gravity. With a sickening crunch, he drove the heel of his palm into the man's windpipe, collapsing the cartilage. As the man fell, Julian spun, using the momentum to kick the machete into the air, catching it, and hurling it into the chest of a sniper on the balcony above. It was a massacre. It was art. Inside the slaughterhouse, the air smelled of stale blood and ozone. Julian reloaded, his breathing rhythm unchanged. He walked down the main corridor, stepping over the bodies of men who had spent their lives thinking they were predators, never realizing they were merely prey waiting for a famine. He reached a heavy steel door guarded by two elites. They hesitated, confused by the sight of the small, beautiful man covered in splatters of red, holding a gun with the casual ease of a cigarette. "Please," Julian whispered, his eyes wide and innocent, mocking them. "Move." They drew their weapons. Julian shot them both before their fingers touched the triggers. Down in the basement, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of distress and metallic iron. Vito was chained to a chair in the center of the room. His face was bruised, his lips split, and his expensive shirt was torn open to reveal dampened electrode pads on his chest. The suppressors in his system made his head swim, dulling his alpha strength, turning his limbs to lead. But his eyes were burning. "You're a dead man, Cassius," Vito rasped, spitting blood onto the concrete floor. "You think you've won? You think taking me makes you the king?" Cassius paced in front of him, holding a cattle prod. He laughed, a jagged, nervous sound. "I am the king now, Vito. Your men are confused. Your territories are unguarded. And your little husband? He's probably curled up in a ball right now, wetting himself." Vito chuckled darkly. It was a low, rumbling sound that unnerved the other men in the room. "You didn't do your research, did you? You looked at his file and saw conservatory graduate. You didn't look deeper." "Shut up." Cassius jammed the prod into Vito's ribs. Vito groaned, his body seizing, but he didn't scream. "I made him promise," Vito wheezed, looking up through his lashes. "I made him promise to leave the life. To never pick up a gun again. I promised him peace." Vito's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine terror crossing his face. Not for himself, but for what was coming. "If you touched me, you broke my promise for me. What are you?" The heavy steel door at the top of the stairs didn't open. It exploded. The concussive force blew the hinges inward, flattening the guard standing behind it. Smoke billowed into the room, thick and gray. Cassius spun around, raising his pistol. "Kill him. Kill whoever comes through that door." 5 men opened fire into the smoke. Bullets chewed up the concrete, sparking wildly. Silence followed. Then, from the ceiling rafters, a shadow dropped. Julian landed in a crouch behind the line of gunmen. He held a combat knife in one hand and his empty pistol in the other. Before they could turn, he hamstrung the nearest man, the blade severing the tendon with surgical precision. As the man screamed, Julian used him as a human shield, blocking the shots from the others. He threw the empty gun into the face of the second attacker, shattering his nose, and in the same motion, snatched a submachine gun from the falling man's grip. *BRRT. BRRT. BRRT. *. 3 controlled bursts. 3 headshots. Cassius was the only one left standing, his gun shaking in his hand as he pointed it at Julian. Julian stood amidst the carnage, the white suit now dyed a horrific, beautiful red. His face was splattered, but his expression was serene, almost bored. "Julian," Cassius whispered, his brain unable to reconcile the pianist with the Reaper standing before him. Julian dropped the machine gun. He didn't need it. He walked toward Cassius, his steps slow and deliberate. "You called me a bird," Julian said softly, tilting his head. "You were right. But you forgot that some birds are raptors." Cassius fired. Julian sidestepped the bullet with a twitch of his hips, closing the distance. He slapped the gun out of Cassius's hand, gripped the Alpha's wrist, and twisted. The sound of the bones snapping was louder than the gunshot had been. Cassius screamed, dropping to his knees. Julian stood over him, looking down with eyes that held no mercy, no humanity, only the cold, abyss-like stare of the white lily. "You hurt him," Julian stated. It wasn't a question. He grabbed Cassius by the throat, lifting the heavy Alpha off his knees with shocking Omega strength fueled by adrenaline and hysterical rage. He slammed Cassius into the wall, pinning him there. "Jules." The voice was rough, broken, but it cut through the red haze in Julian's mind instantly. Julian froze. He looked over his shoulder. Vito was watching him. "Jules, enough," Vito said, his voice straining against the pain. "He's finished. Look at me." Julian's hand trembled around Cassius's throat. He looked at the terrified traitor, then back at his husband. The killer instinct warred with the nurturer. With a snarl of disgust, Julian released Cassius, letting him slump to the floor, gasping for air. "If you ever speak his name again," Julian whispered to the broken man, "I will peel you apart slowly." Julian turned and ran to Vito. The deadly assassin vanished, replaced instantly by the frantic lover. He fell to his knees, his bloody hands hovering over Vito's injuries, afraid to touch him. "Vito, oh God, Vito." Julian's voice cracked, tears finally spilling over, mixing with the blood on his cheeks. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I broke the promise. I had to. I couldn't let them." Vito managed a weak smile. Despite the drugs in his system, he forced his arm up to cup Julian's face, smearing more blood on his skin. He looked at his husband, not as a fragile thing to be kept in a glass case, but as a force of nature. A partner. "You didn't break a promise, amore," Vito murmured, wiping a tear from Julian's eye with his thumb. "You kept the only one that matters. Till death do us part." Julian let out a sob, resting his forehead against Vito's chest. "I killed them all, Vito. Everyone." "I know," Vito whispered, kissing the top of his bloody, golden hair. "Remind me never to make you angry about the dishes." Julian let out a wet, hysterical laugh. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small knife to cut the ropes binding Vito. As the ropes fell away, Vito leaned forward, burying his face in the crook of Julian's neck, inhaling the scent of gunpowder and vanilla. The dynamic had shifted. The Alpha was the king, yes, but the Omega was the sword that guarded the throne. Vito tried to stand, but his legs buckled. Julian caught him instantly, wrapping an arm around his waist, supporting his weight with surprising sturdiness. "Can you walk?" Julian asked, his eyes scanning the room for any lingering threats. "With you?" Vito gritted his teeth, forcing himself upright. "I could walk through hell." "Good," Julian said, helping him toward the exit. "Because I parked the getaway car in the lobby, and I think the engine is on fire." As they stepped out into the rainy night, leaving the ruin of the Iron Syndicate behind them, Vito looked at his husband's profile. The white suit was ruined. The innocent facade was shattered. And Vito had never been more hopelessly in love. The Underworld would talk. They would say the Moretti family was weak. They would try to test the boundaries. Let them come. The Alpha had his Mafia. But the Mafia had the White Lily. And tonight, the world learned that the flower was poisonous. And that is how the gentle pianist reclaimed his title as the city's most dangerous assassin to save the man he loved. If you enjoyed seeing Julian shatter every stereotype and destroy his enemies, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who had a past as a legendary assassin, or is the lie too big to overlook? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt. Masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art, 2 men, BL, Yaoi, man 1. Julian, slender Omega, honey blonde hair messy, wearing white suit heavily stained with crimson blood, holding a silver pistol, fierce protective expression, cold blue eyes, standing defensively, man 2. Vito, muscular alpha mafia boss, dark hair, bruised and battered, shirt torn open revealing chest, sitting on concrete floor, looking up at Julian with awe and intense love, hands resting on Julian's waist. Background is a dark, gritty warehouse basement, concrete walls, dramatic spotlight, chains hanging from ceiling, unconscious bodies in background shadows, cinematic lighting, rain texture outside window, emotional atmosphere, sharp focus, intricate details.